What happened in the markets?
Yes. So actually it was a 2-week rally that Indian markets was on. In the last 2 weeks, the market has surged about 4%. So it was due to some profit booking today, which we saw amid selling pressure in banking and financial counters. Now at close, Sensex was down about 0.77%. It fell about 500 points in today's session and ended at 65,282 levels. The 30 share index scaled another lifetime high today of about 65,898 levels, and it also touched an intraday low of 65,175 levels. Now Nifty, on the other hand, which was on an 8-day winning streak, ended today 0.85% lower at 19,331 levels. The 50 share headliner scaled a new lifetime high today of 19,523 levels, and it touched an intraday low of 19,303.
So what are we seeing here? What is the trend that you're making out, Sayash? Is this profit booking, or is there something more to read into this?
Primarily, it seems like profit booking, because Indian markets has been outperforming most emerging markets and developed markets over the last 2 weeks or so. The market, as I've just mentioned, Nifty is up 4% in just 10 days. So, and also it is like there was some divergence in performance between the developed markets and the emerging markets. So in the first half of this calendar year, Nifty was underperforming most major markets. So we are seeing some, that divergence coming, like closing in, like Indian markets are closing in on the differential that was there between developed markets and emerging markets.
So talk to me about specific stocks, the movers and shakers as we call them, the top gainers, top losers. What do we have?
So all major sectoral indices ended today's session in the red, except auto and the PSU bank index. All sectoral indices were in the red. FMCG, power, realty were down about 1% each. Now among individual stocks, Tata Motors was a top gainer today. It rallied about 2.9%, followed by Titan Company, which was up about 1.21%. Mahindra and Mahindra, TCS and State Bank of India also rose about 0.2%. Now on the other side, among major losers was Adani Ports, which was down about 2.88%, followed by Power Grid Corporation, which was down 2.76%, Apollo Hospitals, which was down 2.59%, IndusInd Bank, which was down 2.38%, and Britannia, which fell about 2.3%.
Okay. Anything to look forward to in the coming week? Anything on your radar that you're watching out for, Sayash?
So PSU banks has been, like the PSU banking space has been active lately. It has the entire index, Nifty PSU bank index, has surged about 17% in the last quarter.
Okay.
So the rally is expected to continue because the asset quality is improving. Just last month we did a report where the NPAs have fallen to a decade low. So all things are looking great for the sector. So I mean, I at least for now expect a rally to continue in the PSU banking.
All right, let's hope the rally continues, not just for the PSU stocks, but even for markets as a whole. Thank you so much, Sayash, for joining us today. Let's move on, and this one is interesting, and it's at the cusp of trade, geopolitics, and of course, our always favorite China-US equations, which may have an impact on India. Now, what are we talking about here? Well, China is flexing its muscles. Now, this comes at a time when US Secretary of Treasury Janet Yellen visits Beijing. The country decides to tell the world that ignoring China from this emerging new trade order will come at a cost. It will come at a cost because two key ingredients in the semiconductor world find their natural home in China. I'm talking about gallium and germanium. These little compounds of natural earth power up almost all semiconductors used across the world for a wide range of applications, from military weapons development to servers that boot up artificial intelligence. China's export restrictions come as an answer, in fact, to US banning the export of AI chips from two large manufacturers, Nvidia and Micron, to China. Why, you ask? Well, because US itself needs to protect its own AI industry and not let China really make progress in artificial intelligence. And AI arguably is the biggest revolution in IT yet. But while these two large economies, US and China, sweat it out in this cold war of trade, what does it mean for India's manufacturing of electronics, LED equipment, and overall trade? Let's find out. I've got Rajiv Khushu, chairperson of IESA, that is India Electronics Semiconductors Association, joining us, and my colleague Shweta Kothari back from her holiday. Hi Shweta, welcome back.
Hi Kartik, thank you so much.
Let's get this straight to Rajiv Khushu. Hi, Mr. Khushu. Thank you so much for taking time out and help us understand what does this ban of these two compounds and metals really mean for India? I mean, there are papers that talk about this not being really a blow to the semiconductor industry, but just a minor dent, and yet we see a lot of hullabaloo around these two being banned, the exports of these two being banned. What does it mean for India's semiconductor industry, sir?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to impact big time for us because, first of all, we don't make any semiconductors today. I think we generally are more consumers of semiconductors. So I think it's not going to directly impact us. Of course, these two materials, if you see, globally, majority of it comes from China. But then there are other countries which also produce. So besides China, there are few countries which include South Korea, US, Germany. And in the past, if you have seen, many countries are trying to basically scale up and diversify the raw materials from other countries as well. So I don't see it's going to be a big impact globally as well as for the country. And also, having said that, so these are export control measures, so which means that there are few companies which are working in these specialized semiconductors because majority of semiconductors are still silicon based where we don't have any threat, but these are generally used for semiconductors which goes into basically power supplies and in the electric vehicles, so where the consumption of semiconductors comparatively is pretty small. So I don't see it as a big impact on us and globally as well. And even if there is, I think there are enough other suppliers, which includes Korea and other countries where semiconductor companies can source these materials.
Okay, so help me understand this in context, Mr. Khushu. We are talking about, of course, being importers of semiconductors and not really manufacturing semiconductors ourselves. But this comes at the back of Micron signing the MOU to come and make in India, and Micron being one of the biggest chip makers in the world based out of US. So raw material for Micron manufacturing in India likely to get hit. We are also talking about creating our own semiconductor industry. In fact, almost 1.5 years ago, a 10,000 crore rupee outlay was laid out for India to become a manufacturing hub for semiconductors. We haven't seen that take off as well. And the third, of course, being our own EV industry, where of course this tussle is on right now on the subsidies that were offered by manufacturers by way of the famed subsidies that they got from the government, passed them on to the consumers, where there were issues about localization and procuring of raw material locally that went into EV. So we're talking about three big trends here from the India, make in India, manufacture in India growth story, which do seem to have some sort of a jilt or a jolt, if not really a blow.
So I think if you pick up, you talked about the company Micron, which has announced about setting up an ATMP in the country. So I think that has nothing to do with the materials which you mentioned. So it is basically the wafer will come into the country, it will be packaged in the country and will be sent globally as well as for India requirements. So I don't think it will have any direct impact on the Micron announcement which happened last week. Then coming to the other announcements which have been made for the semiconductors, I think that is work in progress. So there have been some announcements, but we will see more and more announcements coming now for manufacturing. But then if you see today, we have no announcement for semiconductor fab, where actually these materials will be utilized, will be used. So which means that even if we have an announcement today, it typically takes 2.5 years for the fab to start producing chips. So by that time, I presume all these things will be sorted out. So we will not see any major impact, even if we announce a fab today.
Okay, so no major impact directly in the short term, you're saying, sir, and in the long term, of course, it will get mitigated because raw material will come from other countries like, let's say, Japan or Korea. But talk to me about the global impact potentially on account of rates and also the waiting time for semiconductors to be manufactured on the basis of the raw material that gets procured from these other geographies outside of China. So two things here. One, of course, is going to be setting these new suppliers and testing their product and sort of, just kickstarting that new supplier base ecosystem for large scale international manufacturers. And the second, of course, is the timeline. We already have a fairly significant waiting period, which has now been substantially reduced, but we saw a huge waiting period for cars, for example, where the semiconductor shortage had really elongated the waiting time to get your cars. So in this global context, no direct impact on India, as you're saying, but in this global context of these new supply chains being formed and new suppliers being brought into the fore, what sort of a delay or cost rise are we talking about?
So there may be a possibility short-term cost rise because demand and supply, as I said, so companies who are producing these materials and who are importing these materials, they will have to apply for licenses in China to export. So that may probably introduce some delay. And as such, as you rightly said, there will be some delay in procuring the parts, and that may probably delay some. But then having said that, so what has happened in the past 2 to 3 years, there were more than 35 to 40 announcements of semiconductor fabs globally. So as such, as of now, we are in a situation where the market is soft globally. And although India has not seen that softness so far, but then globally, semiconductor is right now on the lower turf of the curve, which means there are many devices, majority of the devices which are available in much shorter lead times than it was almost 8 to 9 months. But then there are still a couple of devices, few devices which actually goes into automotive where there are still long lead times. But overall, if you see a larger picture, I don't see it denting. There will be minor short-term disruption, but overall we are on track. And the global, I think there have been many meetings across the world where we are trying to mitigate these issues, where everyone has a plan B in place. So I don't see the problem. But then yes, you are right. Short-term disadvantage of cost rise may be a possibility, and also there could be a short-term lead time increase for sure.
All right.
But
so
also what. Yeah.
Right. So what you're essentially saying, sir, Mr. Khushu, is that there may not be a short-term impact or a long-term impact on the supply chain, but the ongoing war between US and China, so to say, regarding technology, now raw material, all related to semiconductor. And as my colleague rightly pointed out, semiconductor being the buzzword here, literally, firing up engines from automobile to you name it, a radio, a TV, a mobile phone.
LED bulbs that go in our houses, or LED panels on TV screens.
Absolutely, everything. Are you of the belief that, and then you mentioned that India has not really announced a semiconductor fab or a semiconductor making facility so far, but we have a very ambitious semiconductor mission plan, and we have set aside a lot of money. There's been an outlay set aside. Very few applications have come in so far. Do you think we are a late entrant, a very late entrant, when we're joining the market at a time when two biggest players are already trying to cut each other out of the game?
See, at a 30,000 level, we feel so, but then if you dig it deeper, so there's a lot of opportunity. That's where I said that some of the devices are still on long lead time. So what has happened in the last 2 years, most of the expansion has happened in the high technology, which is 5 nanometer or even below 5 nanometers. So most of the expansion has happened in that. But then there's huge market, which is below 28 nanometer all the way going up to 90 nanometer. There's a huge market there, and most of the automotive, most of the IoT typically uses those technologies. So there's a huge room for us to complement the whole world, including US and Europe, and even China for that matter, when it comes to the other technologies, whether it is gallium arsenide, whether it is silicon germanium, I think, or it is the 28 nanometer or analog fabs. So there's a huge opportunity for, as you rightly said, there's hardly anything what we use today while we are talking. There's hardly anything what we do today where electronics does not get touched, and that's why you see the market also going up. So, but then there's room for everyone.
Okay. Talk to us about our own semiconductor initiation and the subsidy of 10,000 crore rupees, sir, about 18 months ago or so. Have you seen any proposals? You've also been a great, influencer when it comes to Make in India. Have you seen any proposals from domestic as well as international players to come set up shop in India outside of, let's say, the Micron, which is going to set up its own assembly plant, etc.? But have you seen any sort of interest from Indian players to get into semiconductor manufacturing?
I think Tata's already announced it. I think the chairman already announced it that they finally would like to have a semiconductor fab, and before that, they want to have ATMP, something similar to what Micron has announced for their own products, but then they want to basically have an OSAT. So I think Indian players, a credible name like Tata's, are definitely looking at it, and I think the announcement of Micron may probably expedite the many other proposals which are in the pipeline. And what I heard, and there are many proposals in the queue, and you will soon see in next few months many semiconductor proposals also coming up. So I'm pretty optimistic that, as you rightly said, there's hardly any country of the size of the India that does not have a semiconductor fab of its own. So India needs it not only for the requirements of the in-house requirement, but for strategic needs as well.
Okay, just help us understand, Mr. Kushu, this ban or the sort of license is pretty much license Raj in China that we got rid of 30 years ago. But I think this license seems to be a garb for an overall ban of the raw material. But then this ban does not constitute the ban on value addition over these metals for export, to my understanding. So which means, let's say if this component goes into optical fiber cables, which are very, very relevant for India's 5G revolution, and if those cables or slightly more value-added product was to be procured from China, in your opinion and from whatever you've picked up from people in the industry, is this going to get impacted as well with this new license Raj or the permits that China is talking about?
I don't think these are actually aimed at these things. I think it's generally aimed at semiconductor. I think you mentioned at the start there are some official visits. I think it's probably for negotiation. That's my read into it. So I think we should not read too much into this. So it is probably having a discussion or a negotiation which is going to happen soon in China during the official visit of US there. So I think my feeling is I think we'll move forward. I think one thing all of us need to understand, there's not even a single country which can claim that they can produce complete semiconductors in-house. So everyone has to depend on each other. US and Europe may have some advantages when it comes to technology, but when it comes to raw material, I think it's completely global. Things will come from Ukraine, from Russia, from China, from Germany, all over the place. And there are many materials which we find in India. Actually, we did a report on semiconductor manufacturing supply chain, and we found there are at least close to 30 materials which are used in semiconductors which are produced in the country, but they may not be of the same grade what the semiconductor needs, but then those can be upgraded and then can be semiconductor worthy if the need arises, which means that we have an opportunity to supply to the whole world apart from the Indian fabs which are going to come maybe in next 2.5 years.
Okay, interesting. The 30 materials that are found in India is what Mr. Kushu is saying, which is needed to manufacture semiconductor, yet the applications that have been received so far for a major outlay and subsidy have not met essential criteria or conditions, Kartik, which is the technology. They don't have a technology partner. All 3 or 4 applications that were received in the first time that there was a call for applications did not go through, and the 10,000 crore rupee money that has been set aside is still up for grabs, which essentially means that a lot of companies are showing interest, but they don't have technology. Who has the technology? The US has the technology. Who has the raw material? Well, Russia and China has the raw material. So we are in a position of disadvantage, if I may say so. There is no lack of intent, but we do not have enough raw materials. And in this war between US and China, where it's been continuing since 2019, where US has made a concerted attempt to block technology. It has restricted trade, it has ensured that the technology is not shared with China, and on the other hand, China, it's like a slip on the wrist, from China. We all know that this is not going to have a significant impact. Blocking uranium or blocking gallium will not have a significant impact, essentially because there are other countries that produce those materials. That's number one. And then there is also substitute available for those 2 raw materials. But it is, a warning that if you continue to block us, we will do the same. So it's geopolitics playing
Exactly.
at
So
a
you're
large
saying
course.
it's geopolitics, not as much economics, and I tend to agree with you because this comes pretty much as a blow-by-blow attack. You block Nvidia and you block Micron from exporting their finished fabs, as they call it, the finished products back to China for China to deploy in its own AI development that Baidu, we've been told, is really gung-ho on. And this comes at a clear-cut blow-by-blow retaliation from China that, hey, you're not going to give me exported finished products, I'm not going to give you the raw material. So, Mr. Khushu, do you agree? Is this more geopolitical sort of muscle flexing and not as much economics that we're talking about?
I think I agree to a larger extent, yes.
Right. Great, Mr. Khushu. Thank you so much for taking out time and being with us today. And it was a pleasure hearing your thoughts on this. And good that it doesn't seem to be, a real dent when it comes to economics and
Absolutely.
trade. But Shweta, I want to understand one more thing from you. And let's take this discussion away from economics completely and into geopolitics. Now, China plus one, of course, has been a strategy that the US, that Europe, and incidentally, this is all targeted at Europe and US. When we saw these reports emerge first, we thought this is China's attack on Taiwan. But that doesn't seem to be the case. And Taiwan, of course, through Foxconn, Pegatron, and one more company, they've got their own manufacturing plants here in India. Right. So if this is not really a direct retaliation to Taiwan and more about cutting out Europe and USA, then I think India's manufacturing of especially smartphones, which of course is another large user of semiconductors, should stay intact. What do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, you look at the import figures, these are interesting figures. As far as gallium import from China to US is concerned, it was about $5 million in 2022. Germanium was approximately $60 million. So essentially this is targeted at one of the biggest importer, which is the US, and then followed by European Union, which continue to import both of these products to give finished goods. So if there is going to be a likely impact at all, it's going to be on the US or on the European Union. There is not going to be any significant impact on India, essentially, as you rightly pointed out. Even if you're manufacturing most of the smartphone business here, and Apple eyeing India in a big way there,
Samsung,
and
Apple
Samsung
already
eyeing India,
producing in large
absolutely. So
quantities.
large quantities. All of
$11
these,
billion, if I remember, was
That
the
is
number.
correct. That
$11
is the
billion
number.
worth of exports of smartphones from India,
Smartphones
manufacturing
from
of
India.
smartphones
So,
from India.
We continue to import our semiconductors, unfortunately, till date. And as I mentioned earlier, we've made attempts to have in-house semiconductor facility, a fab as they call it. We haven't been successful so far, and this really does not dent our prospects. We are looking at application. We are first to begin with looking at technology partners, and when we find those technology partners, we could see a proposal going through, then subsequently setting up a facility. Remember, just about a couple of weeks ago, we did a detailed debate, discussion, and an explainer on semiconductor. It's out there on our YouTube channels for those who want to see it. It detailed as to what timeline it takes for a factory to set up a semiconductor business. Approximately 4 to 8 years. There's a lot of cash and capital burned. So, by the time we actually set up a company, I think we're already a little behind the game.
And this is something
in
which
manufacturing.
evolves at a quick speed. You can't really
Absolutely.
wait for a factory to be set up to produce X variety of chips, while the game has grown exponentially to X
And
square, X cube.
the chips are becoming smaller and
Smaller and smaller, totally. So I think the form factor is reducing. That's why you see smaller phones as powerful, smaller laptops as
Bigger
powerful,
TVs, smaller
bigger
phones.
TVs. Yeah. So I think, what do you? Xi Jinping refusing pretty much to meet Janet Yellen, who's on a state visit and lands in China at a time when all of this is going on. What sort of posturing do you make of this?
This is clearly a political posturing rather than an economic one, because economically both of them are battling it out big time, from technology to raw material, and from the import bans to, the export bans. We've seen both countries playing up the politics on a full-blown capacity. So this is going to continue. Economic sanctions are going to continue. Statements continue to be exchanged. At the same time, there is some sort of political posturing there that, look, we are reaching out. We are ensuring that we are, we're not making enemies out of one of the fastest growing economies in the world, or which has the second biggest population now. So essentially, I think this is all political posturing, may not have any economic impact, given. And I think we'll have to also wait and watch out for what comes out of this meeting. With Xi Jinping refusing to meet Janet Yellen, we don't know whether there's going to be important, significant, agendas or anything that would be signed on the dotted lines and anything that would be arrived at subsequently. Until that happens, we don't know how significant this meeting is going to be.
Right, so a lot brewing in the subcontinent, a lot of shock waves there, so to speak, with China posturing fair and square, I don't know how much, square definitely, against US and Europe. And yeah, I think the opinion coming in is that India is unlikely to be impacted with this chip war, so to speak, which is happening between the West and China. And China plus one statement by the US does not also seem to be going down too well for China. But let's stick with the subcontinent and move on south of India to Sri Lanka. Well, there's a 3-day Travel Agents Association of India meeting on in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka, of course, has gone through a political and economic turmoil in the recent past and is building itself up back inch by inch, brick by brick. And I think the time is fairly opportune for TAAI, the Travel Agents Association of India, to hold their annual meeting right in Sri Lanka's capital, Colombo. And News 9, of course, is there to track that event, cover that event, produce a few stories from there, and we are here to give you all the updates of what really happened in day 2 from Colombo. My colleague Deepak Badana is there with us, joining us live from Colombo. Hey Deepak, how have you been?
Hi Kartik, I've been busy.
Good,
this is
that's
day 2,
always important.
And we've had a very busy day. We've had, CEOs from the aviation sector. We've had representatives from the hotel and accommodation side of the business. We've also had government representatives, particularly both from the government of India and the government of Sri Lanka.
Okay.
Behind me, what you see right here is over 550 Indian businessmen who are interacting with an even greater number of their counterparts from Sri Lanka. And what you see happening right here is that the linkages that we talk about, that are going to take regional tourism to the next level, this is how those linkages are being formed. As of now, this is going to be another hour of people from all, different stakeholders interacting with each other, finding connections, hoping to find more business. And this is going to be followed out by another session, which will begin by around 6 p.m. That will be the after hours part. So that will be slightly lighter version of the same. Tomorrow we have, I believe the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka will also be showing up. The Minister for Tourism Sri Lanka, his visit is on the cards. Furthermore, we have ambassadors from 5 different nations who are going to show up. So this has turned out to be quite a busy event.
So what are you picking up specifically on what travel agents and the association is talking about? How do we, so we've already got the traffic lining up outside airports. We see a very, very momentous uptick in travel, both in India domestically as well as internationally. What is the mood that you're picking up from travel agents after 3 years of very, very subdued business owing to COVID-19? There definitely seems to be an uptick now. Is that the mood that you see behind you and all around over the last 2 days that you've been there? And is that something that is really headlining at the event as well?
Definitely, Kartik. See, tourism has been, one bright spot on the economic spectrum post-COVID-19, and people here are hungry for more. The fact is that despite the connections that we do have in South Asia, there is the potential for regional tourism is virtually unexplored. Like for instance, there is a fact which is being bandied about here is that 1.9 million Indians visited Sri Lanka in the year 2019. Now the same number of people visited France or Europe, and this is despite the difficulty in getting there, despite the expensiveness of Europe as a destination. What we are trying to here is to find more linkages so that we can drive up this sector to its full potential. That is what everyone here is working towards.
Okay, and Deepak, talk to me about what you're picking up specifically from the streets of Sri Lanka. Of course, we've seen that Sri Lanka has gone through a fairly tragic economic downturn and is still sort of recovering from the aftershocks of what the economy has been beaten down to. What are you picking up from the streets? How is the consumption momentum there? Not travel specifically, but in general, what is the consumption story looking like?
I think, see, gone are the days of desperation. There is a dignity to the average Sri Lankan individual, and they're approaching it with a full sense of confidence and hoping for the best. Rather, we've come across a number of people, not just from, say, the business, but everyday individuals who are, for instance, just spending a quiet evening on the beach. What you see is a sense of hope. People here believe that the worst is behind them, and they're looking to, make do with the best that they can. Presently, Sri Lanka is under debt, but this is not deterring them. Yesterday, we had a interaction with the Honorable President, Ranil Wickremesinghe, and he mentioned it as a matter of fact. Yes, Sri Lanka is under a lot of debt, but it has something that brings droves of tourists to here, to this destination, and they're ready to leverage their strengths in the area.
So outside of the TAAI event, Deepak, are you seeing tourism? Are you seeing people from other countries flock to the beaches, or is this more local travel?
Yes. Yeah. I've met a number of Europeans. I met a small group of Norwegians who, the only ones who are fond of the summer sun in Sri Lanka. We've had a number of individuals. Even this very event did see people from, all the way from, say, Bhutan, and Bhutan is still South Asia. We've had people from, say, the Middle East who've shown up. So there's definitely a sense that things are on the mend. And the mood is one of optimism. I've interacted with taxi drivers, with auto drivers, with the average cafe owner. And one thing that's impressed me immensely is, the sense of dignity that they give about. It's something which is very heartening to see, particularly in the light of the horrible circumstances that the island nation has gone through. Overall, I believe this is everything to make, a happy story.
Right, Deepak Badana there joining us live from Colombo, Sri Lanka. Thanks, Deepak. Keep it with the event. Keep it with Sri Lanka. And of course, don't miss out those beautiful walks on the beaches while you're there, and bring back great visuals, great stories that you'll find right here on News 9 Live and News 9 Plus. Thank you so much, Deepak, for joining us today. Have a nice day.
Thank you, Kartik. Bye.
Well, let's move on. Enough of Asia, I think, on this bulletin already. Let's move a little westward, and a little birdie tells us that the musketeer is in for a meta shock. Yes, I'm talking about Elon Musk, who bought Twitter just last year and shook quite a few nests. He's now found stiff competition from Mark Zuckerberg's Meta that launched the Twitter lookalike, the Twitter competitor Threads, ahead of schedule. By the looks of it, it's pretty much just Twitter running in dark mode, I think. But with 57 million, I've been told 57 million installs on day one, and Instagram's already existing 2 billion user base, just a click away from installing the sister app, are Twitter's days of influence really numbered? Or, well, is this just another Me Too app that won't stand the test of time? Well, I've got Shweta continuing with me, and my friend Justin joins me as well. Justin, you've done this beautiful story on the musketeer, the original musketeer, Elon Musk. And Elon Musk has filed a lawsuit, or is contemplating filing a lawsuit already against Threads. And it says that critical resources from Twitter were picked up, put onto this project specifically, and here we have it. We have a Twitter look-alike pretty much. What do you make of this?
Exactly. I mean, the talk of the town at that time was that a lot of people actually pointed out that when he went on a sacking spree, he took almost like 60-70% of workforce out, which means that they were pointed out that he didn't really know whom he was sacking, because every department saw some or the other form of entrenchments. So at the end of the day, when he finally realizes right now is that the key people that he had sacked now had always had an option like Meta that is offered right now. So they are placed right now there, and he is creating because Meta got that ground base, because you have to understand you can sign through an Instagram account.
Correct.
You don't require any other sign up. So Instagram already has a 2 billion user base already, so which can automatically transfer to the threads right now.
And
so
imagine you don't really need to build a community, because you can easily transport your community from one Meta platform to another Meta platform. But hold your thoughts, and Shweta, I'll come to you in just a bit. We've got two very fascinating guests joining us for this lovely discussion. Siddharth Pai, founding partner, 314 Capital, and of course the former Twitter India CEO Manish Maheshwari joins us. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us here today. Manish, let me put this straight to you. I don't know if you have seen Threads. I explored. I was one of the 57 million people who installed it on day one. And to me, it pretty much looks like Twitter running on dark mode. In fact, after using it for half an hour, I forgot I'm not on Twitter, I'm on Threads. As a user and as the former CEO of Twitter India, what are your initial thoughts on Threads?
Yeah. So first of all, let me just make a quick correction in my introduction. So yes, I used to run Twitter, but that was a long time back. These days, I run a creator monetization platform called Fenuri. I'm a co-founder there. So yes, I did try Thread. In fact, I spent a lot of time on it yesterday. And I think two things jumps out to me immediately. One is the tight integration with Instagram, both in terms of sign up, but also in terms of you can port your profile and your followership. So that's a pretty interesting and a very strategic move. Second is it does talk about the interoperability and the fact that you can start on Thread, but then there could be other servers that other people can create, which can then talk to Threads, and it can work in a very decentralized fashion. So that's also a very distinct characteristics. Now, what in my view has happened now is that Thread has got a head start, right? I mean, clearly Instagram has billions of people, and any of them can come to Threads. So that head start is good. It gives them a strategic advantage. So it's good, but it's not going to be sufficient, because if you think about it in the history of social media, a long time back, Google started something called Google Plus to compete with Facebook in those days, and that failed miserably, right? So just because Meta is doing Threads, that doesn't mean that it is bound to be successful. What they have to now solve for is that now that they have the users, how do they drive conversations on Threads, and how do they break stories? How do they make it relevant so that people who are text first people, or people who want to engage in thoughtful, opinion driven and news driven conversation, they find value in being on Thread, and they find value in creating content and consuming content there. That remains to be seen, right? Instagram is a visual format, and context does matter. When you're on Instagram, you are there to look at visuals, but when you come to Threads or say Twitter, your context is different. You are looking for cerebral conversation.
So Manish, I agree with you, but how much of that onus is with the platform, and how much of that is with the users? To my limited understanding, it's up to the users to create the content, and the platform is at the end of the day just a platform.
No, but I mean, if that was that easy, then anyone could create platform and leave it to the users to make it successful, right? That doesn't happen, right? So you have to then think about, okay, what can you do at a platform level that encourages people to break stories, to start trending content, right? Now, it happens at two levels, right? One is you have to onboard the right set of people. For example, when journalists like yourself start breaking story on Threads as compared to Twitter first, so then you know that Threads has arrived, right? Today, the stories are still broken on Twitter, and my view would be that many people are not happy with Twitter and the way Elon is managing it. So clearly, they have an incentive now to break stories on Threads first. That's one. Second is that technologically also, they have to figure out how to think about what is trending. How do you think about what content people want to consume? How do you run the algorithm in a fashion which creates value for the user? So I think those are the two roles of a platform. One is to get the right people and then create mechanisms and systems so that the right set of people are able to create relevant content to make the platform useful and get the flywheel going. They have a very good head start with like 60, 70 million people already on the platform. The question is, can they sustain it? I mean, it's about execution and sustaining, and also making sure that people stay engaged after this.
Okay, so stay with me, Manish. I'll just come back to you. Let's get Siddharth Pai also into this discussion. Hi, Siddharth. Have you tried your hands on Threads? And if you have, which I'm sure you would have, since you're on this discussion with us today, another Me Too product, or do you see some differentiation?
So I did try out Threads through a friend's Instagram account. I'm unfortunately not on Instagram. I'm not a big. I'm more a written person as opposed to being a visual one. So that's a choice on my side. One thing I did actually notice from Threads is I think Threads is Instagram's version of how Twitter should actually end up running. I think the biggest thing is going to be whether the audience is going to accept the kind of platform that Threads actually has. Because if you notice, some of the core Twitter users may not actually be people who are comfortable with Meta's policies. One of the conversations that's also doing the rounds now is that the amount of information that Threads actually requires from you is far more than what actually Twitter has been using in the first place itself. So there are definitely privacy concerns that actually come in. I do agree with what was actually said, such that I think Threads also needs to actually find its own place. I mean, its own identity can't be an alternative to Twitter. Now, Twitter actually rose about because it became a quickfire means of actually sharing bite-sized information with the rest of the world, and it did actually manage to find a niche over there itself. Whereas Threads, I think, is like a verbal version of Instagram, which is something that's not something that the core Twitter followers are actually looking for, not something that will actually appeal to the core Instagram follower as well. So I think it's a novelty factor, and given the fact that Meta is an extremely large app, and the challenge between both the founders of Meta as well as Tesla and the cage mass, etc., obviously would have driven up views. But whether this is a flash in the pan or something that's more sustainable, I think it's going to be Threads' investment into its community that's going to determine whether this will become successful or whether this is something else that'll be written off over time itself as another failed experiment, for that matter.
Okay. So, and we have seen other Me Too's not really cutting as much ice as was expected. And this, I'm also talking about Jack Dorsey's own Blue Sky initiative. But Manish, let me just bring this back to you for a minute and let me talk about the lawsuit and the whole battle between Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg. And Elon Musk pretty much saying that cheating isn't really part of the game, but accusing Mark Zuckerberg's Meta of hiring former Twitter employees. Does that seem to be a fair argument from a man who had pretty much fired 70% of his workforce without presumably doing any due diligence on what these employees were doing and what they were capable of?
Well, I mean, I don't know the legalities of it, and I can't comment on it. I mean, if someone gets fired and finds a new job, I mean, they are well within their right to accept a job and work on the new job. I think what is not acceptable is that they carry the documents and the internal information other than what they can retain in their head, right? I mean, of course, whatever you know and the knowledge you have, you will, of course, carry that with you, but not like any documents. So, I mean, this lawsuit, I don't know what will happen to it. I mean, clearly, both parties have strong legal teams, so they will probably fight it out if they want to. But I kind of feel here is that rather than legally fighting this, Elon should think about how to get the focus back on Twitter and how to make sure that Twitter does an awesome job so that people don't leave Twitter in the first place, rather than doing this kind of a, catch-up kind of a game saying, okay, someone else has come up with something better and let me sue them saying, okay, you took my employees. I mean, that won't go down very well in my view. Having said that, you can't say anything about Elon. I mean, Elon being Elon, he can very well mount a legal case. But I mean, this time he's against Mark Zuckerberg, right? So I mean, they also have strong capabilities when it comes to legal kind of a battle. So.
Right. So Manish Maheshwari, Siddharth Pai, thank you so much for taking time out and being with us on this very interesting story. Unfortunately, we are running completely out of time, but I want to throw the last comments to my colleague Shweta Kothari, who's here with us. Shweta, give me the user journey experience, and you of course have a good following on Twitter. Are you going to switch over to Threads, and is that going to be yet another app, or do you think over time it could become the app where your entire ecosystem is linked across Facebook, Instagram and Twitter?
Okay, let me start by correcting. I don't have a fraction of the following as many of my colleagues here on News9, but at the same time, I am an active Twitter user. You know, as our guests rightly pointed out, specifically Manish pointed out, that until it remains a platform where news is first broken in, it will remain a dominant platform. The moment that changes and people increasingly go to Threads to get their daily news updates, for journalists like us, if we start breaking the news first on Threads, that is
where the audience will move.
That is the day where Twitter's got to worry about.
Right. So News9 Live is on Threads as well as on Twitter. So follow us on both places. And before we wind up this lovely discussion that we've had today, my friend Justin had worked on this beautiful documentary available on News9 Plus, called The Musketeer, which pretty much tries to decipher, rip open the mind of Elon Musk. Let's just leave you with some glimpses of that documentary, which you can watch the whole documentary by downloading the News9 Plus app. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.
The world's richest man acquired Twitter for $44 billion and sacked half of its workforce.
He comes across as a bit of a brat, who's overconfident and too much in love with his own intellect.
Is there a method to Elon Musk's maverick move?
I would not underestimate Elon Musk, and he has a unique management style in doing these things.
The churn has sent shockwaves across the world.
Already we see that advertisers have stopped advertising. That is impacting revenue.
He's an innovator, he speaks his mind. He could be wrong, he could be right, but that's the way he is.
The question is not as much about how Twitter will survive Elon Musk, but how Elon Musk will survive Twitter.
The Musketeer.
Pakistan is actually genociding Baloch people. So being Baloch is a crime. If you are a Baloch, it means in the eyes of Pakistan, you don't have any right to live.
The Chinese and Pakistanis are colonizing the Baloch and exploiting their resources.
The Baloch armed struggle will continue unless China withdraws, Pakistan military withdraws from Balochistan and give Baloch complete authority to decide for themselves.
The Baloch feel that if they don't act now, they will become marginalized.
What lies ahead for Balochistan?
Balochistan, Bangladesh 2.0. This and more. Streaming on India's first OTT video magazine, News9 Plus. Download now.
Mumbai's commuters are trapped in crowded trains. Traffic moves at